Afternoon, everyone. I know it has probably been a very long day for all of us, long couple of days. So I'm going to try to keep this engaging and help this, make this be very helpful for all of you. So my name is Kevin Barlow, and I am a senior solution architect here at Databricks. And in this session, we're going to be talking about how do you migrate a Snowflake data warehouse to the Databricks data intelligence platform. A lot of the strategies we're talking about here are rather ubiquitous. We are talking about Snowflake specifically because they are a very common data warehousing option, but we can apply these techniques to really any data warehouse on-prem and in the cloud. Now, I have to start off by saying, if my slides will move. What did I do? Okay. So I have to start off with some of the legalese. This is a safe harbor statement. Everything I'm talking about is informational only. We're not necessarily recommending one way or another. Any features we talk about, all the legalese you can read here. Basically that this is best practices that we've learned, and myself, from doing many of these Snowflake migrations. But please reach out to your Databricks account team if you want more assistance, because we're happy to talk through in more detail about how to actually do this in your environment. Now, with all that being said, let's actually talk about how to do one of these migrations. And again, the key word for today's session is a successful migration. There's a lot of really great announcements today at the keynote: generative AI, LLMs, AIs everywhere, machine learning everything, Unity catalog being open. And all of these need data to work well. Now, where is your data? I'm assuming that for many of you here, that data is in a data warehouse. Now, you can get away with not migrating from your data warehouse in some cases. We do have Lakehouse Federation, you do have Spark JDBC connectors, all of these different ways, but to get the full value of your data, you do need to migrate your data to the Lakehouse. And that's what this talk is about, is how do you actually get the data to Databricks? And it sounds like a really simple proposition, but we all know that that's not really the case. Because the longer you've had a platform, the more tech debt there is, the more processes there are around that data warehouse. And my goal today is to take the fear away from a migration, that there are ways that we can have successful migrations, because like I said, I've seen a lot of them in my time here at Databricks. Now, we do have dedicated migrations teams at Databricks. We have lots of SI partners and PS at Databricks. So we have ways that we can talk about doing this with our assistance, but also on your own. And we all love migration, so we really want to make sure that we can help you. Now, how hard is a migration is probably what you're asking. And I'm going to give you your favorite answer. Depends. And it's not really the answer you want to hear, because every migration is different. If you're coming from a legacy on-prem database, that's going to have its own challenges versus a data warehouse already in the cloud. Now, there's a whole spectrum. There's your lift and shift migrations, there's modernization, and then everything in between. And in terms of risk, it depends on how much modernization you want to take on, because there's a trade-off. If you want to just do a lift and shift and put that into the Lakehouse, you can do that. You won't get all of the value out of that, but it at least gets you started. Versus you can do a full-on modernization and you get all the benefits of AI and what Databricks has to offer, but that does inherently have more risk to the migration. So there's also risk of licensing costs and lots of other things that we won't get into in this talk today. But the goal of today is that there's a framework to help you on that spectrum of migration so that we can get you started. Now, let's talk about that framework. This is an example that we like to use because it's worked with the migrations that we've done, and it allows you to think about your entire data estate in one picture. We happen to like this one because it shows analytics and it shows capabilities of a data platform without relying on one particular technology or really focusing that a particular component of your platform overarches everything. You see that data warehousing is an important component of this framework, but it's not the only part of it. It does have a spot, and it's very important that we understand that. And this framework allows you to understand your current state. Some data warehouses say that they are a data cloud, or that they're a data mart, or whatever term. This allows you to put those features and capabilities into a framework to assess your current state. Now, like the talk is titled, we'll be talking about this in the context of Snowflake today. There are the slides that were given to me, but this again could apply to really any data warehouse out there. So looking at Snowflake as our cloud data warehouse, this is likely what your tech stack looks similar to. You see Snowflake as your data warehouse, and it does data warehousing very well. And if you've implemented the modern data stack, you likely have a lot of tools surrounding your Snowflake data warehouse. For ingestion and transformation, you likely have tools like Fivetran and dbt or Matillion. If you need governance, you pretty much have to use tools, your Elations, your Immutas, your Calibras of the world. Storage is a proprietary format in Snowflake data storage, even if you're using some of the Iceberg capabilities, which is a whole other discussion that we can have after the session here. And then if you want to share your data, you have a proprietary sharing mechanism with Snowflake to Snowflake sharing, but that it does kind of limit you to what you're trying to do. And then for AI and ML, which is really what a lot of Databricks today we've been talking about, from what we've seen with our customers, not many of them are using Snowflake for that capability. So you likely are using some of the cloud native tools or some of the third-party vendors. And you see all the red dollar signs. That's really what we want to point you to, is that while these tools are great and we're partners with most, if not all of them, they have a place and we want to make sure that they are used in the right way to help you optimize your costs, but also to make your value out of your data platform larger. So now we have our source state, our existing state. Let's talk about the target state. So going back to our analytics framework, it all starts with our core engines. We have Photon and Databricks SQL for our data warehousing and BI. We have our ETL capabilities for batch and streaming data sets. And of course, we have our ML runtimes for everything AI and ML. For storage, we recommend storing data in the open format of Delta. And thanks to Uniform, and with the recent announcement around Tabular, there's really no downside to leveraging these open source formats like Delta, because you store your data once, they're all built on Parquet, and then you have multiple metadata layers that allow you to use different tools, different readers, different writers, and your data still exists in your lakehouse. At the heart of the platform, and the key here is that there's no proprietary formats. That's a really big deal because we're all familiar with Oracle databases on-prem. You might have ERP systems, you have CRM systems. They all have their different formats. And for analytics, that's a big problem because you need to join these data sets together. So not having proprietary formats, putting it into a performant open source format really unlocks a lot of analytics. Now at the heart of this, overlaying everything is Unity Catalog, our governance layer that touches everything that the Lakehouse touches: data, analytics, AI. And that's great because it's ubiquitous, it gives you lineage, discoverability, auditability, and this works for all data workloads. So it really unlocks a lot, especially with the announcement that Unity Catalog is now going to be open source, so that you're not locking into a particular governance layer either. Couple automations here. Now, when it comes to data pipelining, we have a lot of really great tools. We have, of course, the Spark framework, which is the de facto standard for big data processing. We have Delta Live Tables, a more declarative approach to data engineering. We have Autoloader, allowing you to take in new files as they come into the cloud so you can get that data in, make it useful, and supercharge your analytics very seamlessly. And I want to make sure we call out that we have a fully featured workflow engine. So if any of you really want to get off of Airflow, check out Workflows, because Workflows is fully featured. It gives you all the capabilities you need in Airflow. And while we do partner very well with Airflow, we have a lot of customers who are moving towards Workflows in general. And then at the top, we have all the different capabilities that you need to deliver your analytics. We are, of course, built on notebooks, but we support really any IDE that you might want to use. And that just makes sure that your users can get to their data in whatever format, or whatever source it comes from, they can get to it easily and performantly. And I want to make sure that we don't forget Delta sharing, because a big proposition of an open format is you're not locked into who you share your data with. Delta sharing is an open standard for sharing your data so that you unlock the value chain for your consumers, for your data providers. You no longer have to make sure they have a particular system to share your data. As long as they have a place to store the data and compute to use it, you have a way to share data. So now that we have our source state, we have our target state, now we need to actually plan out the migration. And we could spend hours talking about that in detail, and we can't optimize everything. So in these next few slides, I want to talk about critical things that you need to look at when you think about your migration. First and foremost, like I've already said a couple times, use open formats. Delta, of course, is completely open. Iceberg and Uniform are completely open, and that just unlocks a lot of performance, a lot of accessibility for your data, so you're no longer locked in. And that means that you can connect whatever tool you want to that data, whether or not it's Databricks. I, of course, would love if it's Databricks, but if you want someone who can just connect their PyCharm IDE to a Delta table, you can. Python has a native Delta reader. Now, to do this, we recommend using, or to get your data into these open formats, we recommend using Snowflake's copy into procedure to then get that data into Parquet, and you can do an in-place conversion to Delta. Pretty simple. Second, and this is a big one, make sure you use and start with Unity Catalog. If you start it at the beginning of the migration, and preferably even before your migration, your life is going to be so much easier. If you base your data governance strategy around it, then you can have that full access control and lineage from the beginning of time. Because nowadays, lineage is no longer an optional capability. With the rise of LLMs, that lineage information has super valuable information for your analytics, for your operations, and you need to make sure that you have that. And of course, we want to make Dan from IDC happy that we help your users actually find their data. By having your data in Unity Catalog, you can leverage the assistant in Databricks and our AI and our better search engine to get to your data faster. So if you want to build a data layer, EDP, a data catalog, whatever you want to call it, you can do that very easily with Unity Catalog. Now, we want to make sure that you have standards for your integration, and we recommend using DLT and autoloader. And the reason for that is we don't want your data engineers to be spending their time building tools. We want them to be transforming data so it's useful. That's why they became data engineers in the first place. And the great thing about Delta Live Tables and Autoloader is it takes in all of the best practices that we've learned from the Spark community, from data engineers with decades of experience, and we've packaged it into a really easy to use functionality where all you have to do is tell us what the table needs to look like, and we figure that out and optimize that pipeline. Now, if you like SCD type 2 transformations, which it's a data warehousing crowd, so we probably do, we support that in DLT as well. So we really can support your pipeline no matter what. And more importantly, DLT allows you to have better data freshness because that's what your users want. I'm sure we've all been hounded by our business teams that data isn't coming fast enough or it's not good quality. This supercharges that pipeline. And if you still have choice at the end of the day. If you have bought into Fivetran, to dbt, to Airflow, we do partner with all of them and they integrate seamlessly into the Databricks platform. Now from here, we need to start figuring out how do we design for performance. So in the data warehousing world, you're pretty much forced to use SQL. And every nail, every problem in your data estate was solved with the SQL hammer. In Databricks, we support the 4 major languages that we support very well with a very performant engine. And there are lots of cases where it's better to do these data engineering processes in Python or Scala. So use the right compute, because if you use, say, our jobs compute as opposed to our SQL compute, that is a significant cost reduction, 3x cost reduction. And that is automatic business value and better processing time and better data freshness. And because Unity Catalog overlays everything, you're not missing out on anything. You still get all the visibility into your pipelines, you still get the lineage and auditability, you just get to leverage the best language and the best framework out there. And like I've already mentioned, use workflows. If you don't have an orchestration capability right now, or if you are using Airflow or whatever it is and you want to modernize it, we would definitely recommend using it. Workflows is the fastest growing part, or one of the fastest growing parts of our platform, because it's become so much more fully fledged with the ability to have complex logic for your data pipelines, repeatability, the ability to fix jobs that have failed. And again, if you use dbt, we have native support for dbt in these workflows, so you're not losing out on anything that you've already put in. And finally, don't forget the user, because there's 3 parts to any migration. There's data, there's code, which we'll get into, and then there's the people. make sure that whatever tools they have are connected to Databricks. So we have Databricks Connect, which can support any IDE that they want. So if they like to use VS Code, we've put a lot of work into our VS Code extension, both for Python and R, as well as for SQL. So you can submit your queries directly to a Databricks cluster with no change to their workflow. If they like PyCharm, or if you have R users, heaven forbid we touch RStudio, we integrate with RStudio very well. So let them use the tools they want, especially if they use BI tools like Power BI or Tableau or Qlik, Looker, Sigma, whatever partner we have here. We have Partner Connect, so you have a direct connection to those tools, and it's super easy to use. So we don't want to upset the users, we just want to make your data platform much more efficient. Okay, so we've talked about target state, we've talked about our source. How do we approach migration? Now, we already talked about how I recommend using Unity Catalog. Again, that is the key to making your life easier, so we definitely want to make sure we do that. Now, the first question you're going to ask yourself is, how much am I going to move? And you have to really think about it, or we recommend thinking about it in terms of use cases, not just data tables, not just jobs or queries, because if you focus on a use case, it's easier to put a subset of your ecosystem into context, and then you can also tie that to direct business value for that particular use case. I've seen plenty of teams who have migrated thousands of tables, all of their jobs, and spent a lot of money, and then their users aren't using the platform because they didn't think about that part of the process. So make sure you're thinking end to end and constantly focusing on tangible outcomes. And when you arrive at an outcome, make sure you report back on that so you can see the business value and really move that migration forward. And also continue to enable. Databricks will be a new transition for some of your users. Even if they're using their existing tools, make sure they understand how to connect to Databricks and Unity Catalog and Delta Lake moving forward, so they're not just focusing on their previous workflow as well. And we have a lot of great training, so we want to help you on that journey. If you're a Databricks customer, you get access to our whole self-service training catalog, and if you need something more specific, reach out to your Databricks account team. We have a lot of really good offerings for that as well. And make sure that you at least assess the use of automated migration tools to really streamline that migration process. No automatic migration tool is perfect, but it at least gets some of that easy workloads done for you, because the biggest error that we see is when human teams are trying to migrate and translate millions of lines of SQL. No one wants to do that. That's a big task. Let's automate as much as we can. Now, from a methodology perspective, we see 5 key phases. First is discovery, and we've already talked a lot about that. It's figuring out, what is my current data ecosystem? For warehouses specifically, we have at Databricks what we call our profiler tools. These are Databricks tools that allow us to understand what's going on in your data warehouse. We have one for Snowflake. If you have a very common data warehouse, we likely have a profiler tool for that as well. And it'll get you more detailed information than just how much data you have. It'll tell you how many compute nodes you're using, what are the specs for them, how much data do you have, how many jobs do you have. And you also need to think about just counts overall of tables, pipelines, users, tools that are connected to this. And we want to make sure that we drill down on the complexity, because if it is possible to do code conversion automatically for those standard SQL queries that you can lift and shift into Databricks, let's do that. That's much simpler than you testing everything out individually. We have a lot of code analyzers to help out with that as well. We'll also talk about some of our tools after that. And that falls into the assessment phase, where you've gotten this inventory, let's figure out what to do with it. And after that, then it's phase 3. Let's think about our strategy. How do you map out this migration so you can figure out how to get this value? We typically recommend starting with a pilot MVP so that you can figure out, for a particular use case, or maybe a set of use cases, how do we migrate that from Snowflake to Databricks? It proves out the pattern. It gives you a template. It lets you practice this before you try to boil the ocean and do the entire data estate. And it really is not pretty when you try to take it on all at once. So do it once, scale it up, learn, repeat, iterate, and then most importantly, decommission the old stuff once you've migrated it. I've seen enough customers leave on their Snowflake environment. No one's using it anymore, but it's still there. They're still paying for it to a certain degree. So make sure you decommission that old stuff before you move on. Okay, I didn't want to move. So now, those last two phases, I want to drill in a little bit more because there's a little bit more information that could be covered on that last slide. So we've already covered the architecture mapping. That's kind of what I think about the first three steps. You know, it's figuring out current state, target state, inventory, all the stuff that we've talked about. The middle three are more iterative steps. You're probably going to repeat these over and over. Data migration, code migration, testing, all of that stuff. And again, you want to keep doing these over and over as you take on new pipelines, keep testing, keep improving on your process as you get more familiar with this process and with Databricks in general. And now take a look at that bottom line, because the more people get on the platform, the more they ramp up, they get more confident, and it's easier to manage the changes to your workflow because they see that it's easy to point my report in Power BI from Snowflake to Unity Catalog. Oh, it's a little bit easier to think about my data in this format. And ultimately, we want to get you to that last stop, new use cases, things that the Databricks platform really enables you to do at a production scale, at an enterprise quality. So as you get new data on, make sure you're checking in with these teams to understand, now that you have this capability, what do you want to do with it? Do you have anything you want to predict? Do you need generative AI? I know they're going to say yes, but still ask them. And make sure that you're ready for these new use cases when they come up. So I talked a little bit about profilers. This is an example of the results from our Snowflake profiler. Again, if you have any common data warehouses, make sure you reach out to Databricks. We likely have a tool for, or we at least have someone at the company who knows that warehouse really well and can help you analyze what's going on here. And this will tell you information about what is your usage? How much are you spending? What are you actually using the tool for? Because a lot of the time we ask customers, well, what do you use Snowflake for? Oh, I use it for SQL and BI. And then 70% of the work is actually data engineering work, where there's a really low-hanging fruit to modernize that into Python. And more importantly, what takes a long time to process in Snowflake, and how do we focus on optimizing that and bringing it into Databricks? So typically for Snowflake, we recommend looking at the virtual warehouse, what teams are using it, what ETL processes are you running, what are the BI tools that are connected. And if you think about it like this, it's an easy way to chunk up your migration. So again, you're not boiling the ocean. As for technology, it's pretty easy to map the capabilities from Snowflake into Databricks. And this is a snapshot. We have a full-on excellent Snowflake migration guide on our website. Definitely check that out where these tables are taken from. Because if you are on this journey, you can see that if you're looking at your tasks in Snowflake, what does that map to in Databricks? Or where would I put my data from Snowflake into Databricks? What's the nomenclature for that? How do you migrate to that? So this is a super in-depth guide that I won't do it justice in the 5 minutes here, so definitely check that out and read through that, because I think it's really, really helpful. And it even gets into more details, such as what do you do with your data when it's in the lakehouse? It goes into partitioning, Z-ordering, liquid clustering, things like that that really help you optimize your Databricks implementation. Now, the big question is, my warehouse has years, potentially even decades of data, especially if it's an on-prem database. So how do I get it out? The first question you need to ask yourself is, do I need to get all of it out? A lot of organizations, when they take the inventory of their databases, find that they actually don't use a lot of the tables, sometimes even as much as 40% of their data. No one touches it. It's just something that you're collecting over time. And that might be a good opportunity to think about what you're doing with your data. Do you actually need to keep maintaining this data? Maybe you just want to hold it for auditing purposes and put it into something like cold storage in Glacier or something like that. And that allows you to then parse down some of the data that you do need to migrate. Now, when you do find what you do need to migrate, most data warehouses have some kind of efficient parallel processing to get data into a file format. In Snowflake, it exports into Parquet. In other data warehouses, it could be CSV, could be text files. Doesn't really matter what the file type is. Just pick something reasonable, something common. That way it's really easy to then do that translation into a Delta table. Now, this is going to put the least load on your system and is generally what we recommend. So again, for Snowflake, it would be using that copy into command into a Parquet table somewhere in a data lake. Now, for on-prem databases, it's not that easy. You are going to have some ingress-egress charges. Moving that into the cloud, that's its own kind of consideration, but something that we need to keep in mind. We do have other options depending on the size of the data. We have Spark connectors for pretty much any data warehouse under the sun. Snowflake has one, Redshift has one, Postgres has one. So if you do need to move data through a Spark cluster, that is an option. We try to limit or try to recommend not doing that as much because you are paying for the compute of your cluster as well as the compute of your database. Sometimes that's a consideration. It will be a little bit slower than just dumping data into a file format. But if you do want to do that, it's as simple as connecting to that database, doing a select star, and then writing a delta table. Pretty straightforward. If your warehouse does support it, you can also use replication and CDC's tools, such as Archeon, who we acquired last year. And that can be a really quick way to get users onto Databricks because it's one tool that does all of that data transfer for you. There are just additional licensing costs which you need to take into consideration for your own particular scenario. Now, we are a data warehouse crowd, so we do need to talk about data models here for a little bit, at least one slide. Anyone who's been at the conference today has seen something from Databricks, or if you use Databricks, you know the medallion architecture. I want to make sure I reiterate, the medallion architecture is more of a logical suggestion for how to write your data. It doesn't have to be written in stone that you have to have a bronze, silver, gold layer. But with bronze, silver, and gold in mind, bronze is your raw data. Silver is your cleaned up data, enriched with other data sets. Sometimes you join them together, up to you. Gold is your ready to use data for analytics. You can take it farther if you want. I've seen customers with platinum data, diamond data. I've seen layers in between, copper and tin. Whatever you want to call it, it's a data model, it's whatever you want. And during your migration, I would recommend just mapping your existing data model to what it would look like in Databricks. Typically, it's largely going to be the same. If you like a star schema, use a star schema. If you like a data vault, go for it. You know, we do typically talk about things in a Kimball dimensional model, but if you like a data vault, if you like a data mesh, if you like, I've heard data fabric, or whatever strategy you have with your data, it's possible in the Lakehouse, it's possible with Delta, and Unity Catalog can govern all of it. And Unity Catalog, frankly, enables it better than a lot of other platforms. And we have guidance for all of these. There are some links that are at the bottom of the slide, but if you search for these blog posts, it goes into more detail about how we recommend implementing these with the Lakehouse. Now for the code migration, which frankly is the hairier part of migration for anyone. We recommend moving to native tools as much as possible. So some of these are autoloader, DLT, using workflows, things like that, because that allows you to get full benefits of the Databricks platform right out of the gate. And of course, if you have existing investments into the Matillions, the Fivetrans of the world, continue using them, allow them to be the ingestion or transformation tools into the Lakehouse, and then make sure they just work with Databricks. And it's usually a pretty easy transition when you do that. Now, if you are using Snowpipe and Snowflake as an example, that's actually a pretty easy transition into autoloader. It's a very similar concept, and then that really allows you to kickstart your pipelines with DLT and things like that. From a code perspective, Databricks SQL is based on ANSI SQL, but we all know that's only part of the story. ANSI is more of guidance on SQL, but everyone has their own flavor of ANSI SQL. So again, use automated tools as much as possible to help with that. We have some partners that I'll talk about in a second, but once you do that, you really want to start focusing on the performance issues that come with translating code. Sometimes code that runs really well in one data warehouse doesn't run as well in another data warehouse. So using our best practices that we have published all over the internet with Z-ordering, liquid clustering, thinking about how you do data, how do you handle merges, things like that. Learn from them, apply them, iterate as you get better. And again, you leverage your Databricks account team because we're definitely happy to help you with that. And then once you've done that, then you just need to do testing. You need to make sure that the code you have migrated is working and that the data that's coming out is what you want. We recommend doing reconciliation over a few days of processing just to make sure that it's working over time, not a one-time run. You can use standard techniques, row counts, doing statistics on columns. You can even go down to row level reconciliation depending on the data set and the importance and how visible the row level is. And just, you can do sample data sets or you can do a full reconciliation if you're really paranoid about a particular data set. I've seen plenty of customers do that as well. And now finally, we're at the user perspective. And this should be a pretty easy transition. You need to modernize your reports. So if you have the standard BI partners that we have here and many others, typically it's as easy as using our Partner Connect capability to then connect those tools to Databricks as opposed to another data warehouse. And if we don't have a built-in connector, we of course support the standard JDBC, ODBC open connections that are out there. This is usually the easiest part of the transition. It's more the teams that handle the last mile transformations might have to learn a new tool versus the actual BI users, but it's something to consider as well. All right, so let's jump into the tool for a second. Make sure you guys are actually seeing it. This is just a really quick walkthrough of what it might look like in your Databricks environment to do this migration. So this diagram here is showing what our current example is. I am a customer who's moving from Snowflake to Databricks. I'm doing, first step is I'm unloading my data into Parquet. Second step is I'm loading that Parquet to a Delta table and then using Databricks SQL, DLT, in this case actually just Databricks SQL because I already have a pipeline in Snowflake to then transform that data from bronze to silver to gold. I'm making sure that I govern it with Unity Catalog because if there's one thing you take away from this today is use Unity Catalog, make that from the beginning so you don't have to go back and then do a migration to Unity Catalog. And that's it. So let's dive into the next step. This is a high-level view of what our pipeline looks like in the Snowflake environment. Standard customer sales data, orders, pipeline, all that kind of stuff. Transforming that in Snowflake SQL into our EDW, our data marts, all that kind of information. And here's an example of what some of those queries might look like in Snowflake. Basically, you're going to create an external stage, and then from those tables, you're going to export them as Parquet into those stages as different Parquet tables. And then, again, we recommend using the copy into command in Snowflake. That's the most efficient to dump data into Parquet. Now, let's jump to our next table here. All right, so now our data's in Parquet in a data lake somewhere. I'm in Databricks now, and I need to create my Delta tables and register them to Unity Catalog. So I'll start off by creating a schema. And for anyone who's not super familiar with Unity Catalog, you have your catalog as your top layer, your schema, think of it like a database, and then you have tables, models, everything underneath that schema. So it's our three-layer namespace. So I'm starting off by creating a schema in this Lakehouse catalog, and I'm just gonna replicate my enterprise warehouse into a Delta catalog. And I'm creating the tables beforehand just so I can do a really easy copy into command. And it's a very similar syntax. I'm copying from this S3 location, the format is Parquet, and I'm putting some options here for merge schema. You don't have to use those options. It does make life easier if new data is coming in, but that's kind of a neither here nor there conversation right now. And then you can see that it loaded, in this case, 150,000 records in 12 seconds. And for the next two tables, there's 1.5 million and 6 million rows in 10 seconds and 29 seconds respectively. So this is a very efficient process, and it's the easiest way to migrate your data. Data, frankly, is the easy part of the migration. And we'll repeat this process for our gold tables as well. Now, the gold tables are our analytics-ready data sets. So we want to make sure they have a little more rigidity around the schema, what the fields look like, because we probably have reports that have been running for years that expect data in a certain format. So we don't want to break that. Let's make sure we enforce that here. Databricks, SQL, Unity Catalog, we support all the data types that you would want. We have primary key, foreign key support. Everything that you're looking for your data warehouse can just be put onto a Delta table. And it's going to be a very similar context. We're going to create or replace our table using our silver table and then applying these transformations, these schema enforcements, new fields, whatever it may be, putting that into our gold tables. And we'll just repeat this over and over. So we're defining the tables, and again, we're loading the historical data in this particular case. But you could also have your transformations translated into Python, into DLT, and achieve this same end result. In this case, we just did a simple copy into. And then finally, we're going to focus on migrating the pipeline. So we've done an in-place data migration of historical data into the tables, and now we have to migrate the pipeline so that new data populates it the way that we expect. So here's an example of what the bronze to silver transformation looks like. So again, that's from raw data to cleaned, enriched, joined data sets into silver. And it has some SQL logic for case statements, joining, all that kind of stuff. We don't have to dive into it here. But because we're ANSI SQL, most of the time queries like this that are fairly standard translate pretty easily into Databricks. You might have some slight syntax changes, but it's usually pretty common to just be able to copy and paste. And now we can enrich our pipeline a little bit more. We can create functions that we can leverage over and over. These could be SQL functions, Python, AI models. All of these allow you to then enrich your data a little bit more and just inject that into your pipeline. And we're just repeating that for all the different tables we have. So I don't want to go line by line because I think you all get the gist here. And we'll repeat the process for silver to gold. And again, because gold is our analytics ready data sets, those transformations are typically more complex. They typically have a lot more complex logic. They might have a lot of custom functions that go with it. There might be multiple tables that we're joining together. So these might be the ones where where the automated tooling doesn't satisfy the automatic translation, but it requires more hands-on to do these migrations. But if you want to take a picture of that beefy SQL statement there, you absolutely can. But in this case, we're merging that data into our gold set so that way there's new rows that come into our table. It's either inserting or updating them or whatever it may be. And that's a really efficient process as new data comes in. Sorry, it's a really long SQL query. And you can see here that we inserted another, looks like 37,000 rows in 40 seconds with that pretty extensive query. So now we've proven out that our pipelines are ready to go. Any new data that comes in, we can merge into our existing tables. And then now we should, in theory, have completed our data migration, our code migration, and now it's just the people migration to point our reports and dashboards at the right table. So where's my screen? Jump back to my PowerPoint. So in summary, we started off by profiling our existing state. What do I have? How much data do I have? What do my warehouses look like? How complex is it? Then I think about how do I build a new platform? How do I govern it with Unity Catalog? How do I make sure it has an open format? How do I use the native tools in Databricks? And then from there, how do I plan out this in the context of use cases or deliverables? How do I automate this as much as possible? How am I training my people the right way so they're ready to use this new platform when it comes to them? Change management is always going to be a hard problem to solve, but something that we need to make sure we consider. And typically, when customers migrate to Databricks from these data warehouses, they realize a lot of value. They have a platform that's much more cost-effective because we have different SKUs, different languages, different capabilities, and we have a really powerful engine to process all this data at scale. And that leads me to point number 2, is that this is a hyper-scalable data platform. Because we're built on Spark and other frameworks like that, the bigger the data gets, the more effective Databricks actually gets. And that's a really strong value proposition, because I don't think anyone's data estate is shrinking. So it's something to think about moving forward. You now have open formats and an open sharing model, so you've really unlocked a lot of capabilities of knowledge sharing in the industry, of sharing data with your respective value chain of consumers and producers and providers. And now you have a platform that can handle more modern capabilities. You can do really powerful real-time streaming automatically with Delta Live tables. Databricks is one of the leaders for streaming pipelines in general, and now you have that capability, so you can get that real-time or near real-time pipeline that has its whole other value added to it. And now you have a platform that was built for AI and machine learning, so your data scientists have best-in-class tools to build these generative AI capabilities, or to build these models that can predict better business outcomes. And all of this can be done because you've done this migration. And again, I just want to show you that migrations don't have to be scary. They can be done successfully. We have a framework to help you do it, and we really want to help you do that, both with our own resources, with partners. So let's make sure that we can help you have these successful migrations. That's the end of my actual presentation, and I want to make sure that it's the end of the day today, but we have a whole day tomorrow. Continue to learn about how Databricks as a platform can help you in your organization. And please give me feedback on the session today. Hopefully my jokes weren't too bad, and I want to make sure I hear how I can do this better, how we can help you better do these migrations. So again, discover more sessions, get certified if you haven't already. You get a cool jacket if you do, so definitely do that. And yeah, that's it for me today. So thank you very much.